The amphitheater hummed with the rustle of exoskeletons and the low subsonic thrum of a dozen species breathing in unison. 100 cadets stood at attention, each the pride of their civilization, hand-picked for the Galactic Academy's final crucible. They were the sharp minds, the warriors, the heirs of star empires, and they were about to learn what fear truly meant. Overseer Threx, a towering insectoid whose carapace was a chronicle of old scars, gestured toward the shimmering archway at the center of the hall. Beyond that gate lies the Deathworld field, a perfect simulation, terrain, atmosphere, and biosphere drawn from a Class 12 Deathworld cataloged by the consensus as Terra. A ripple of translated murmurs passed through the cadets. Class 12. Most of them hailed from worlds no higher than Class 4, where the most aggressive life form might be a territorial fungus. Threx's compound eyes swept the crowd. In the last 3 cycles, no cadet has survived the full duration. This is not a test of strategy or combat. It is a measure of adaptation. You will be inserted in groups of 10. The field will do the rest. His mandibles clicked in what might have been grim humor. May your ancestors remember you. The first team assembled. Among them, a Kriv scout with chameleonic skin, a hulking Quarnite whose muscular bulk seemed designed for crushing, a lithe sylphid who could read air currents like a language, and several others, each exuding confidence. And then there was the human. Alara Vance stood at the edge of the group, her standard-issue cadet tunic already rumpled. She was shorter than most, pale-skinned with a shock of dark hair tied back in a frayed cord. Her eyes, a flat gray-green, traveled across the archway with an expression the others mistook for dread. The Kriv hissed something about soft prey. Alara didn't respond. She just rolled her shoulders as if loosening them for a morning jog. The archway flared, reality fractured and reassembled. They stood in a forest, but not any forest the aliens recognized. The air was thick with something sharp oxygen at a percentage that would eventually intoxicate non-adapted lungs. Gravity settled onto them like a lead coat. The sylphid's delicate frame buckled instantly, its bird-like bones groaning. The Quarnite grunted, muscles straining. The Kriv's skin flickered through panicked color changes, as its respiration struggled against the unexpected atmospheric cocktail. Alara took a deep breath. The air tasted of loam, of distant pine, of a coming rain. Her heart rate slowed, not from fear but from a bone-deep recognition. She might as well have stepped into her grandmother's backyard. While the others staggered, she knelt and touched the soil. Dark, rich, teeming with simulated microbial life that the archive had meticulously recreated. Real enough. The first casualty happened within 90 seconds. A Valyrian gas breather, its translucent helmet designed for methane, cracked its filtration membrane against a low-hanging branch. The branch was innocuous, a mock orange, but the Valyrian's biology mistook pollen for a neurotoxin. It collapsed, fluid sacs rupturing, and dissolved into a bio-neutral mist as the simulation whisked the body away. Panic erupted. The sylphid tried to fly, forgetting the crushing gravity. Its wings snapped. The Quarnite roared and punched a tree, which proved to be a mistake. The tree was a dogwood, but the movement triggered a defensive response from a nearby swarm of simulated hornets. The swarm descended, and the Quarnite's thick hide, immune to most kinetic damage, was riddled with stings delivering a simulated apitixin tailored to Terran mammals. It died convulsing. Through it all, Alara walked. She avoided the hornets by standing still and humming a low note, a trick her grandmother taught her. Vibrations confused the swarm's threat assessment. She stepped over a patch of poison ivy without looking. The Kriv, half mad with terror, saw her calmness and shrieked, "What are you?" Alara paused by a twisted old oak, its trunk thick with ivy, and plucked a leaf. She crushed it between her fingers and inhaled. The scent was sharp, citrusy, clean. It flooded her with a memory, a porch swing, a gray-haired woman's laugh, a jar of sweet tea sweating in the summer heat. She looked back at the Kriv, her eyes holding a decade of loneliness she'd never admitted to on this sterile station. "I'm from here," she said, "or somewhere close enough." The Kriv's skin turned the deep purple of terminal shock. A vine, subtle and patient, had wrapped around its leg. Kudzu in the simulation's databanks grew fast enough to see. The Kriv was dragged screaming into the underbrush. Alara watched, her expression unreadable. Then she turned and walked deeper into the forest, where the canopy swallowed the artificial sky. High above in the observation gallery, Overseer Threx leaned forward. His mandibles lay still. On the biomonitor, every signature from Team 1 had flatlined except one, a steady, almost bored pulse. The human's vitals barely registered stress. The field, programmed to analyze and escalate, flagged her as an anomaly. It began to pull from deeper, darker archives. Alara paused by a stream. The water was clear, cold, and she knew it would test potable for her physiology, though an alien would likely die of microbial shock. She cupped her hands, drank, and then looked up at the sky, where the first clouds of a Terran supercell were gathering. A smile, faint and genuine, crossed her lips. "Smells like rain," she whispered. And the Deathworld field, for the first time in its operational history, issued a new challenge. Survival threshold exceeded. Initiating Apex Predator Protocol, the forest fell silent, a predator's silence. Alara recognized the shift, songbird analogs hushing, the pressure drop in the air, the electric tang of ozone. She'd been 9 when she learned that quiet meant something was hunting. Now she was 23, alone in a holographic echo of home, but her body remembered everything. The simulation hadn't ended with the Kriv's demise. The field kept running, analyzing her, adapting. It spawned new threats from the collective nightmares of 100 sentient species who had glimpsed Terra and recoiled. But to Alara, they were just Tuesday. A rustle in the underbrush, too deliberate. She dropped into a crouch behind a log thick with moss. 3 creatures emerged, the size of large dogs, their bodies an amalgam of badger and wolf, a species she'd never seen but whose body language telegraphed pack tactics. The field's algorithmic predators. They fanned out, scenting the air. One's head snapped toward her. Alara's fingers found a fist-sized rock. She didn't throw it at the creatures. She pitched it far to her left into a thicket. The pack whirled and charged the sound, giving her the second she needed to move upwind. They'd circle back, but the stream was close. She slipped into the water, letting the current carry her downstream, submerging until only her nose and eyes broke the surface. The cold was a jolt, a reminder of life. She'd done this before, playing hide-and-seek with coyotes in Montana. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the field, 3 other insertion teams had been scattered. The simulation's narrative design forced encounters, and soon Alara heard a scream. Not an animal sound, a person. She pulled herself onto the opposite bank and followed the cry. In a small clearing, a solitary figure huddled against a boulder, a luminar, their bioluminescent skin flickering erratically with panic. It was Rill, a cadet she recognized from xenobiology seminars. He was known for tactical brilliance, but his species had evolved on a low-gravity moon with no predators. Here, his light-bending camouflage was useless. The simulation's diffused sunlight washed him out, and his lithe limbs trembled with exhaustion from the gravity. "Don't move," Alara said softly, emerging from the ferns. Rill jolted, his pale blue light flaring. "You, the human, this is madness. I saw a Quarnite torn apart by flying stinging insects. How are you still functioning?" His words came fast, translated by his neural implant. "Because I'm not fighting it." She knelt beside him, checking his vitals. His skin was clammy, his respiration too fast. "Shock. You're hyperventilating. Slow your breathing or you'll burn out your oxygen exchange. The air itself is poison." "No, it's just rich, like breathing cake." She tore a strip from her tunic, soaked it in stream water and pressed it to his forehead. "Your body can adapt, but panic will kill you faster than the atmosphere." Before he could answer, the ground rumbled. Alara's eyes narrowed. She sensed the seismic prelude minutes ago. The field loved drama. A fissure cracked open 20 meters away, vomiting steam and the shriek of escaping gases. The simulation was collapsing the safe zones, hurting them. "We have to move." She hauled Rill upright. He weighed nothing in this gravity, though it crushed him. "There's a cave system east of here. I saw the entrance when I was in the stream. Can you walk?" I think so." His pride was a tangible thing, flickering in his bioluminescence. "But why help me? The simulation rewards individual survival." Alara's jaw tightened. "My grandmother said the only thing worse than dying alone is surviving alone. I've had enough of that." She didn't wait for his reply. She started moving, and he stumbled after her, because the alternative was the fissure, and the things that crawled out of fissures in a death world. The forest gave way to a field of wild grasses, the kind that swayed innocently. To Rill, it was a sea of rustling menace. To Alara, it was concealment. She pulled him low, and they crawled. She pointed out the signs. Flattened grass meant a path. A certain aromatic plant meant good eating. A cluster of shiny leaves meant avoid at all costs. "Poison sumac," she whispered. "You touch it, your skin will blister and you'll wish you died with the hornets." Rill's mind, so used to analyzing fleet formations and energy outputs, reeled. This wasn't combat. This was a conversation with a landscape that hated you. "How do you know all this?" "Your species database." "No, I grew up in a place called the Rockies. My grandmother was a ranger. She taught me that nature isn't cruel, just indifferent. You learn its language or you die." She paused. "I lost my family to a flash flood when I was 9. My grandmother, my mother, my brother. I was the only one who knew to climb the high rocks when the water turned brown." Rill fell silent. The confession hung in the air, heavy and raw. For the first time, he saw not a primeval monster in human skin, but a young woman carrying a graveyard inside her. The sun, artificial but relentlessly programmed, began to set. The temperature plummeted. Rill's thermoregulation faltered. And then from the tree line behind them, a roar split the dusk. A massive shape shouldered through the pines, 9 feet tall on hind legs, its fur matted, its eyes holding the flat, calculating hunger of a Terran apex predator. The field's piece de resistance, Ursus arctos horribilis, a grizzly bear. Rill's light died to terrified white. What is that?" Alara stood up. She rolled her shoulders again, the same pre-jog looseness, but now her eyes held a focused fire. "A ghost, and she remembers me." The bear charged, and Alara walked to meet it, not as prey, but as a long-lost rival. The hook, she didn't run. She opened her arms as if welcoming an old friend or an old enemy, and called out a word in a language Rill's implant couldn't translate. A bear command. A Deathworld lullaby. The grizzly closed the distance in a thunder of displaced earth. Rill's scream caught in his throat, his body locked in an atavistic paralysis that no tactical training could override. He was about to witness the human's annihilation. But Alara didn't flinch. At the last possible instant, when the bear's claws were a blur of keratin and killing intent, she pivoted on her left foot, dropped her center of gravity, and flowed around the charge like water around a rock. The bear's momentum carried it past her, and as it passed, her right hand shot out, not with a fist, but with 2 extended fingers that jabbed precisely into the hollow behind its ear. A pressure point, an intersection of nerves and muscle that her grandmother had shown her on a hibernating black bear they'd accidentally woken when Alara was 12. "They're not monsters, baby girl. They're just muscle and bone, and everything with a nervous system has a reset button." The grizzly stumbled, its legs tangling, and went down in a sliding heap of fur and confusion. It was not dead, not even truly injured, but its motor control was briefly scrambled. It lay there, panting, shaking its great head as if trying to dislodge a bee. Rill's bioluminescence stuttered back to life, a dim, incredulous blue. You struck it, and it fell." "It'll be back up in a minute." Alara was already scanning the terrain. The sun was a bloody smear on the horizon. "We need to be in those caves before it shakes it off. It won't fall for that trick twice." She grabbed Rill's arm, her grip gentle but insistent. "Move." They ran, or rather, Alara ran and Rill did his best approximation in a gravity that made his skeleton feel like it was made of chalk. The cave entrance loomed ahead, a low slit in a limestone cliff face draped with maidenhair ferns. Alara practically threw him inside, then turned to wedge a deadfall branch across the opening. It wouldn't stop a determined bear, but it might encourage it to find easier prey. The cave was dark and smelled of wet stone and guano bats, simulated but convincing. Rill crumpled against a wall, his light pulsing with exhaustion. "I can't, the gravity, it's breaking me." Alara knelt and rummaged in the small survival pack she'd scavenged from a dead cadet's remains earlier. She pulled out a thin emergency blanket, the kind that reflected body heat. "Here, wrap this around yourself. The temperature's dropping fast outside. Hypothermia will kill you as surely as a bear." He took it with trembling hands. "Why are you doing this? I am nothing to you, a rival." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she busied herself scraping a small hollow in the cave floor, collecting dry bat guano and bits of desiccated fern. "I had a brother," she finally said, her voice echoing slightly. "Younger, his name was Leo. He was always scared of thunderstorms. Used to crawl into my bed during summer storms, shaking. I'd tell him stories to distract him." She struck a piece of flint from her pack against a steel blade, showering sparks onto the tinder. A tiny flame caught, grew, and painted her face in warm light. "He died in the flood. I couldn't save him. I couldn't save any of them." The fire flickered, and her eyes were very old. "Maybe I'm just tired of not saving anyone." Rill stared at the fire, then at her. His species didn't cry, their emotional expressions were chromatic, a slow swirl of colors. Now a deep violet, the color of profound sorrow and empathy, bled through his blue. "I judged your kind. I thought you were primitive, a fluke that escaped your world by sheer luck. I was wrong." Outside, the bear had recovered. Its roar echoed through the cave, but it didn't approach the entrance. Perhaps the fire gave it pause. The simulation was intelligent. It knew when to escalate and when to let the environment itself do the work. The temperature continued to plunge, and the first patters of rain turned into a sudden, deafening roar. A supercell had finally broken. Hail began to fall, chunks of ice the size of a human fist, slamming into the earth outside. One ricocheted through the cave entrance, shattering against the far wall. The storm was a battering ram of the elements. Then the rain changed color. A faint greenish tint, acidic. The simulation had turned the precipitation into a corrosive agent, designed to break down synthetic materials. Rill's emergency blanket began to smoke where a drip from the cave ceiling touched it. He cried out and scrambled deeper. Alara grabbed a broad leaf she'd brought inside, a skunk cabbage leaf, waxy and tough. She held it under a steady drip, letting the acid pool, then lifted it. The leaf's coating held. She offered it to him. "Here, nature's umbrella. The waxy cuticle protects it. We can use these to shield ourselves until the storm passes." Rill stared at the leaf, then at her rain-soaked, mud-streaked face, and something broke open in him. Not fear, but awe. "You are not fighting the Deathworld," he whispered. "You are dancing with it." Alara allowed a small, tired smile. "You learn the steps or you die, but the music is beautiful once you hear it." She handed him the leaf, then went back to gathering more, humming that old lullaby, the one about the fox and the rabbit and the moon. The cave felt, for a moment, not like a tomb but like a den, a safe place in a world that was never safe. As the hail hammered and the acid dripped, the simulation's overseer algorithms made a note. Subject Alara Vance was not merely enduring, she was exhibiting protective behavior, a trait that increased survival odds for groups. In response, the field bypassed intermediate threats and loaded the final sequence, apocalyptic scenario Omega-7. Pyroclastic flow. The mountain above them was now a volcano, and it was about to wake. The cave's temperature began to rise, and a deep, subsonic rumble vibrated through the stone. Rill's eyes met Alara. "What now?" She didn't sugarcoat it. "The whole mountain about to turn into a furnace, but there's a way out. Lava tubes. If we can get to the lower tunnels, we can ride out the heat." She grinned. And it was the wild grin of a girl who'd once raced a wildfire across a Montana ridge. "We run, but not away, toward the lava tube." She pointed into the darkness at the back of the cave where a narrow fissure descended. "The hook. The volcano's first explosive shockwave hit, and the cave ceiling behind them collapsed, leaving only one path, down into the mountain's fiery throat. The fissure swallowed them. Ilara went first, feet finding ledges that she sensed more than saw, her hands testing rock as if reading Braille. Rill followed, his bioluminescence the only light, casting writhing shadows on the walls. The heat grew from a warmth to an oppressive, suffocating weight. The rumble of the volcano was a continuous thunder now, punctuated by sharp cracks that sounded like the planet's bones snapping. They emerged into a lava tube, a cathedral of obsidian glass formed by ancient flows. The simulation's artistry was staggering, stalactites of cooled magma, the floor a rippled black mirror, and in the distance, a vein of actual glowing magma, pooling red and orange. The heat was brutal but survivable if they stayed low where the air was cooler. Ilara ripped strips from her already shredded tunic and soaked them with the last of her water, handing one to Rill. "Breathe through this. It'll filter some of the gases." Rill pressed the cloth to his respiratory orifices. "You speak of it as if you've done this before." "I have. Caves, not volcanoes, but the principle's the same. Stay low, stay calm, follow the airflow." She pointed to a faint wisp of steam drifting down a branching passage. "That way. Moving air means an exit or at least a bigger chamber." They moved deeper, the magma's glow painting their faces in demonic light. Ilara's mind drifted, unbidden, to another cave. She was 14, trapped in a collapsed mine shaft with two friends during a spelunking trip in Kentucky. They'd been lost for 18 hours. One of her friends, Jason, had broken his leg. She rigged a splint from a backpack frame, told jokes to keep them awake, and navigated out by following the sound of dripping water. When rescue finally came, Jason's father had called her a hero. She'd only felt the cold, abiding knowledge that the earth would always be hungry, and that she'd only bought them time. "Ilara," Rill's voice pulled her back. "Your light, it dimmed, you were somewhere else." She shook her head. "Just ghosts," she didn't elaborate. The tube opened into a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in darkness but its floor alive with bioluminescent fungi, a meadow of soft, otherworldly light. Stalagmites rose like frozen whispers. It was, against all reason, beautiful. Rill exhaled in wonder. "Is this real? In the simulation?" "Based on real places. Glowworm caves in New Zealand, Waitomo. I always wanted to see them." Ilara's voice caught just for a moment, a childhood wish now granted in a death trap. She knelt and touched one of the glowing caps. It pulsed faintly. "They feed on insects. The simulation must have introduced cave crickets." As if summoned by her words, a faint chittering echoed. Not crickets. The temperature, already hot, spiked. The magma vein behind them bulged, and from a crack in the obsidian wall a new horror emerged. Not a single creature, but a swarm, glossy, chitinous things, each the size of a human thumb, with translucent wings and bulbous, multifaceted eyes. They moved with a single, hive-mind intelligence. Deathworld wasps, the simulation's bioengineered apex of insected terror. Their sting, according to the briefing materials Rill had skimmed, carried a cocktail of cytolytic peptides that would liquefy non-Terran cellular membranes on contact. For Ilara, it might just be anaphylaxis. Rill stumbled backward, his light flaring in panic. "No, no, no, not again." Ilara grabbed his wrist hard. "Shut up and listen. Do exactly as I say. There's a mud patch near that stalagmite, see it? We cover ourselves. Mud masks our thermal signature, confuses their heat sensors. Then we don't move, don't breathe loudly, don't even think loudly." She was already scooping handfuls of thick, mineral-rich mud and slathering it on her arms, her face, her neck. She did the same for Rill, her movements quick but gentle. The mud was cold, a shock against their overheated skin. The swarm, a living black cloud, swept into the chamber. The sound was a dentist's drill amplified 1,000-fold. Rill squeezed his eyes shut, his body rigid. A single wasp broke from the cloud, curious, and landed on his eyelid. He whimpered, a tiny, broken sound. Ilara's hand moved with the speed of a striking snake. She pinched the wasp between her thumb and forefinger, crushing it. Its abdomen burst with a wet pop. She held it up a smear of ichor and whispered, "They taste like almonds when roasted. High protein." She winked. Rill was beyond speech. The swarm, confused by the mud and the lack of movement, circled for an agonizing minute and then, as if receiving a new directive, funneled into a side passage and vanished. The silence that followed was a blessing so profound that Rill collapsed to his knees, shaking. Alara pulled him up. "We're not done. The swarm will be back if the heat signature changes, but look." She pointed to the far side of the fungal meadow where the rock wall was marked with an unmistakable faded symbol, the universal glyph for exit left by a previous, long-dead cadet class perhaps, or a glitch in the simulation's historical layer. "That's our way out. But we have to cross the meadow without disturbing the fungi. Some might be toxic if broken." Hand in hand, the human girl and the alien boy picked their way through the glowing garden, a fragile tableau of trust in the heart of a Deathworld's dream. Above them, the unseen eyes of the Academy watched, and Overseer Threx's mandibles were frozen in an expression that, on a human face, would be slack-jawed reverence. The data stream showed the human's vitals steadying the luminars, 2 heartbeats syncing. No simulated environment had ever produced symbiosis. The field learning categorized a new entry, mutualism, recommended further study. At the exit symbol, a blast door set into the rock, Alara paused. She placed her palm on the cold metal and looked back at the bioluminescent cavern, her face streaked with mud and the ghost of a smile. "It's so beautiful," she breathed. "I wish my grandmother could have seen this." The door began to open, and a blinding, sterile light spilled in. The end of the simulation was near, but the hook, the light wasn't the Academy. It was the field's final, brutal scenario, a full environmental collapse, flash frozen. The temperature on the other side plummeted to -40 degrees in an instant, and Rill's exoskeleton groaned, cracking visibly. "Alara, I can't." The sterile light was not salvation. It was a sub-zero wind that howled through the doorway, flensing the warmth from their bodies in seconds. The simulation had transported them from the volcanic depths to the summit of a collapsing ecosystem. A tundra caught in a flash freeze, the sky a sickly yellow, the ground permafrost peeling back to reveal skeletal trees like grasping claws. This was Omega-7's final, cruel joke, a world dying and them with it. Rill's exoskeleton, already stressed, made a sound like ice shattering. A hairline fracture spiderwebbed across his thorax. He fell, his bioluminescence flickering to a desperate, cold blue. I'm cracking. My species, we can't handle this gradient. I'll shatter like glass." Alara caught him before he hit the ground. His body was a freezing brand against her chest. She pressed her palm to the fracture, felt the cold radiating from it. Think, grandmother's voice. In the cold, you share warmth or you die. There's no pride in a frozen corpse. She dragged him behind a windbreak of twisted, frozen branches and began to strip off her own outer gear. The tunic, the thermal mesh underlayer, everything except a thin synthetic base. She draped it all over him, then wrapped herself around his torso, pressing her skin to his carapace, sharing her body's stubborn, Terran heat. "What are you doing?" His voice was a reedy whisper. "Sharing my thermal envelope. Humans run hot about 37 degrees Celsius. That's a furnace to you right now. Just stay still. Stay awake." She began to hum again, that lullaby. Her lips were close to his auditory sensor, the sound of vibration as much as a melody. The song was about a fox chasing the moon, and the moon laughing because it could never be caught. A song of impossible things. The tundra wind screamed around them, but in the tiny space beneath the branches, a fragile pocket of warmth grew. Rill's shivering, which had been a violent, death-rattle thing, slowed. The crack didn't spread. His color shifted slowly from the flat blue of hypothermia to a tentative, pulsing lavender. "Your body, it's a furnace. It burns calories like one, too," she murmured. "We evolved endurance, persistence hunting. We'd chase prey across savannas for hours in the heat, and we'd survive winters that killed everything else. We're basically biological contradictions." She chuckled, a dry, brittle sound. My grandmother said humans were the universe's biggest mistake that refused to die. Silence save for the wind. Then Rill said very quietly, if she was anything like you, the universe was lucky to have her. Alara's throat tightened. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Not on Earth, where she was just another tomboy from a broken home, and certainly not in the academy, where she was the Deathworlder freak. She buried her face against the back of Rill's neck and let a single, hot tear fall onto his carapace. It sizzled faintly, a tiny steam in the cold. Thank you. The blizzard raged for what felt like hours. The simulation was relentless, but it couldn't override the laws of thermodynamics that two bodies created. The algorithm calculated, recalculated, and finally logged a new outcome. Survival probability for the Luminar subject has risen to 62% due to cross-species thermal transfer. Unprecedented. The field, designed to break, was instead teaching. When the winds finally died and the yellow sky cracked open to reveal a pale, indifferent sun, Alara knew the simulation was in its final phase. They were past the worst. She helped Rill to his feet. His legs wobbled, but he could stand. The exit symbol was now projected onto the horizon, a shimmering, undeniable beacon. The field was showing them the way out. "We walk," she said. "Can you make it?" "If you're with me," Rill replied, and meant it in every dimension. They crossed the tundra together, two specks against a white canvas. The landscape was littered with the frozen, shattered remains of simulated life. A mammoth analog, a pack of direwolf constructs, all fallen to the same flash freeze. Deathworld indeed. But Alara looked at them not with triumph, but with a quiet reverence. Even the strongest die here. That's the point, isn't it? It's not about being the biggest or the most armored. It's about being the one who can change when the world changes on you. Rill nodded. Adaptation, the Academy's true lesson. He paused. Alara, when we get out, I will tell them about you, about humanity. The galaxy needs to know you are not monsters, you are shepherds, survivors who learn to care for others because you knew what it was to die. The beacon grew brighter. The air shimmered with the simulation's boundary. Alara allowed herself a small, weary smile. We'll see. First, let's get out of this freezer. They stepped through the boundary together, and the Deathworld dissolved into the clean, white light of the Academy's simulation chamber. But what awaited them was not a silent ovation. It was a chamber full of stunned, silent observers, instructors, cadets, and a medical team that had been prepared for zero survivors. At the center, Overseer Threx stood motionless, his compound eyes fixed on the disheveled, mud-caked human girl and the near-dead Luminar she half-carried. The silence was absolute. Then Alara raised her head, squinting in the artificial light, and asked, "Is that it? My grandmother's garden was meaner." The hook. The Overseer's mandibles began to tremble, not with anger, but with a species-wide realization that the galaxy's carefully constructed hierarchy had just been turned on its head by a girl who called a Deathworld home. The medical bay hummed with the soft chime of diagnostic scans. Rill lay in a regeneration cradle, his cracked exoskeleton being knitted back together by nanites, his vitals finally stable. In a chair beside him, Alara sat wrapped in a standard-issue thermal blanket, her hair still damp from a sonic shower, her bare feet tucked under her. She looked small and ordinary now, a far cry from the feral goddess who had wrestled a bear and walked through fire. But the Academy did not see her that way. They saw a living weapon. Overseer Threx had convened an emergency session of the High Council of Species, a virtual gathering of ambassadors from a dozen major civilizations. Their holographic faces loomed in the observation chamber above the medbay, a gallery of judgment. A S-lithe diplomat, all scales and cold calculation, spoke first. The human violated protocol. The simulation was designed for individual survival assessment. Her intervention skewed the data and endangered a cadet she had no right to assist. "She saved his life," countered Threx, his translator carrying a rare edge of emotion. For the first time in the history of the Deathworld field, a cadet exhibited cross-species altruism under extreme duress. The Luminar cadet Rill is alive because of her. Alive and potentially contaminated with Terran behavioral memes, hissed the S-Lyth. Humans are a Deathworld species. Their psychology is adapted for perpetual crisis. We allowed one into the academy as a cultural exchange, not to infect our best and brightest with her resilience. Alara listened from below, her face impassive. She'd expected this. She'd been the human her whole life, the anomaly, the one they whispered about in corridors. Even among the stars, she was alone. Rill stirred in his cradle, his bioluminescence flickering to wakefulness. He'd heard the tale end. His voice, still weak, cut across the medbay speakers. That is enough. All eyes turned to him. The holograms shifted. Rill struggled to sit up, refusing assistance. I was there. I watched Cadet Vance not only survive a Class 12 Deathworld but thrive in it, and I watched her choose repeatedly to keep me alive when the simulation would have rewarded her for abandoning me. She gave me her own thermal covering. She risked organ failure to shield my body. His chroma shifted to a deep, pulsing gold, the color of absolute conviction among his people. You call it contamination. I call it the highest form of sentience I have ever witnessed. If her Terran behavioral memes are infectious, then the entire galaxy should hope to be infected. The chamber fell silent. The S-Lyth scales rippled with displeasure but offered no retort. Another ambassador, a molluscan elder from a water world, spoke slowly. The question remains, what do we do with this knowledge? The human's performance has revealed a fundamental weakness in our training. We have been preparing our cadets for sterile, predictable environments. The universe, as we have long suspected, is not sterile. Deathworlds exist. They may be more common than we thought. Threx seized the opening. I propose a new directive. The Academy will no longer treat the Deathworld field as a final, lethal test. It will become a training ground with human cadets, if they are willing, as instructors. Who better to teach survival than those who evolved on the most hostile planet ever catalogued? The proposal sent a fresh wave of shock through the council. A human training the galaxy's elite, preposterous, dangerous, necessary. Alara finally stood, letting the blanket fall. She walked to the center of the medbay directly under the holographic gallery. I'm not a soldier, I'm not a survival expert, I'm just a girl who misses her home. Her voice was clear, carrying that strange, quiet authority it had held in the cave. But if you want to understand Deathworlds, you have to stop seeing them as monsters to be feared. They're not evil, they're just alive. They push back. They test you. And yes, they kill you if you're not paying attention, but they also teach you. She looked up, meeting the eyes of each ambassador in turn. I'll teach. Not because I'm better than you, but because I don't want anyone else to feel as alone as I've felt here. Rill's golden glow brightened. Threx's mandibles spread in what might have been, on a human, a proud smile. The council murmured, but the tide had turned. Hours later, the official decree was made. Cadet Alara Vance was to be granted the Academy's highest commendation, the Stellar Valor Award, and offered a position as the first human instructor in the newly formed Deathworld adaptation program. The news spread through the station like wildfire. Human. Instructor. The word Deathworld began to shed its cloak of terror and take on a new sheen, one of grudging respect. But Alara wasn't in the victory celebrations. She stood alone at a viewport, staring out at the stars. The galaxy was so vast, so full of soft, gentle worlds that had never known the bite of winter or the hunger of a predator. And somewhere among them was a speck of blue and green, invisible from here. Home. Rill found her there, moving slowly but steady. You look like you're about to jump out an airlock. She didn't smile, just thinking. I haven't been back to Earth since I was 16, 7 years. I thought I'd feel more triumphant. All I feel is homesick. Then go home, he said simply. The program can wait, you've earned it. Maybe, she turned from the stars. But first I need to see it, the field, one more time alone. Rill didn't question it, he just nodded. The hook. In the silence of the observation deck, Threx's voice came over the intercom, granting her request with a single, ominous condition. The field has been reset to a new profile. It has been learning from you, Cadet Vance. This time, it may not be so forgiving. The archway hummed, identical to the one that had swallowed her days before, yet everything had changed. Alara stood before it, no longer a cadet but a symbol, wearing a simple, comfortable jumpsuit. No survival pack, no weapons. The technicians had warned her that the field's adaptive algorithms had been reconfigured based on her data. It would tailor the experience specifically to her, pushing her to her absolute limit. She just nodded and said, "Good, I want it to be real." She stepped through. The world that materialized was not the chaotic onslaught of the previous run. No volcano, no flash freeze. It was a meadow. A simple, sun-drenched meadow in high summer, ringed by familiar mountains, the Absaroka Range, the jagged spine of the Rockies. Wildflowers swayed in a breeze that carried the scent of lupin and pine. A hawk circled overhead. A creek chuckled over stones. Alara's breath caught. She knew this place. She knew the exact bend in the creek where the fishing was best, the stand of aspen where the elk bedded down, the deer trail that led to a cliff overlooking the valley. This was no random generation. The field had plundered her deepest memories, the ones she'd shared with no one. It had rebuilt her grandmother's homestead. She walked forward in a daze, her hand brushing the tops of the grass. The simulation was perfect. Every blade, every insect hum. She reached the old log cabin, its porch swing creaking in the breeze, and her legs gave out. She sank onto the step, just as she had 1,000 times as a child, waiting for her grandmother to call her in for supper. There were no monsters here, no challenges. The field, in its newfound, almost sentient wisdom, had understood. It wasn't trying to break her. It was giving her a gift. "Why?" she whispered to the empty air. A voice answered, synthesized but soft, woven from the data of her own memories. It was Threx's voice, but the cadence was the field's own. "Because you taught us that a death world is not defined by its capacity to kill, but by its capacity to inspire love despite the killing. This is what you fought for. This is what you are." Tears spilled over Alara's cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She let them fall onto the weathered wood. She thought of her grandmother who taught her to read deer tracks and laugh at thunderstorms. Her mother who'd sung that lullaby. Leo, who'd been afraid of the dark but always followed her into it, trusting. All ghosts now, all waiting here in this impossible, beautiful lie that felt truer than anything. She stood and walked into the house. The kitchen table was set for two, a jar of wildflowers, a photo on the mantel, one she hadn't seen in years, her family, the last summer before the flood. She picked it up, her fingers trembling. "I miss you," she said to the faces. "Every day, but I'm okay. I'm going to be okay." The house gave her no answers. It just existed, a testament to what was lost and what could never truly be lost. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time was fluid here. Eventually, she walked back outside into the meadow and lay down among the wildflowers. The sky was that impossible Montana blue, the kind that stretched forever. A butterfly landed on her knee. She laughed, a wet, happy sound. "The whole galaxy is terrified of this place," she said to the butterfly. "They call it a death world, a Class 12 nightmare, and I guess it is. It took my family. It's taken a lot of people." She looked around at the mountains, the sky, the buzzing life. "But it's also the most beautiful thing I've ever known. It's home." She said the word like a prayer, home. And the field, listening, made a decision. Its purpose had always been to categorize, to rank, to define threat levels. But Alara Vance had introduced a new variable, one its programming had never accounted for: love. The meadow, the house, the mountains, these were not threats. They were a sanctuary. The Deathworld profile she carried within her was not a weapon. It was a garden with teeth perhaps, but a garden nonetheless. The simulation's logs updated with a final entry: reclassification. Terran Deathworld profile Vance, Alara, threat level irrelevant. Designation home, permanent archival with honors. Access unlimited for subject's lifetime. Purpose, solace. The archway shimmered, and Alara stepped back into the academy, her eyes red but clear. The entire council, plus Rill, Threx, and a crowd of cadets, waited. They watched the feed in stunned silence as the field, their ultimate weapon of evaluation, had become a love letter to a human girl. Alara looked at them, a small smile on her lips. "I'm ready," she said, "to teach, to learn, to show you that the scariest places in the universe might just be the ones worth saving." She reached out and took Rill's hand, a gesture of friendship that sent a murmur through the crowd. Some monsters don't conquer Deathworlds, they come from them, and they miss them terribly. But they also carry them wherever they go, and maybe that's the point. Maybe that's the gift we humans bring. The chamber didn't burst into applause. It was quieter than that. A ripple of color from Rill, a solemn nod from Threx, a grudging tilt of scales from the S-Lithe ambassador. Acceptance, dawning like sunrise over those impossible mountains. The girl who called a Deathworld home had not wiped out a class. She had saved the last of them, and in doing so, had saved a little bit of the galaxy's soul. Far away in a simulation that now ran permanently in a quiet node, a meadow bloomed and a porch swing creaked, waiting for her next visit. Home wasn't a place anymore. It was a state of being. And Alara Vance had finally found it among the stars where no one expected it.